Kevin Kitt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me on.
It's good to have you, man. So let's do a quick introduction. So you live in Scotland, in the UK. You're a dentist uh, by training, and you still have a dental license, but not a practicing dentist. So I'm a dentist as well. So podcast between two dentists, largely about stuttering in this case. Uh, if you would tell us what you're doing for work, since you're not practicing dentistry anymore. What are you doing in place of that?
Certainly. So I think it really works well with going back from grassroots. I actually never wanted to be a dentist. Ultimately, I actually wanted to be a psychologist from day dot. The really fascinating thing is that mom and dad always put academia at the forefront, and getting 5 A's and getting the qualifications to become either a doctor or a dentist. Parents want you to be the best profession that you can be, so you can either be a doctor or a dentist. And myself being me, I thought, working as a doctor, I may have to work in a building full of, this was my mindset, by the way, a building full of ill people for at least 10, 15 years until I become that consultant. And I felt that the dentistry would allow me to have that sense of freedom and the sense of being that business person, the use of my hands, as well as working with people one-to-one with that long-term relationship. So that's kind of where it got me to dentistry. And fast forward about 8 or 9 years after I graduated, I last year graduated from psychology. And what I do with my day-to-day job now, having hung up my drills, is empowering people to become the best version of themselves. What I say, however cliche it might sound, to enrich, empower, and enlighten them. And that comes in facial aesthetics, as well as my approach to facial aesthetics, which I present as medical well-being procedures.
Gotcha. And so in terms of the medical well-being, so that with the psychology focus that you have in your recent education, would you say that it's that a lot of that has to do with mindset and with well, the way I would describe this is sort of helping people get out of their own way and just sort of be themselves and live the kind of, really moment to moment life that they want to live.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that. It really is that there is this distraction as well from, and disconnection from what we really want. And some people really perceive that through changing what their outer is. And when someone comes to me saying that they want to look more fresh or more comfortable, more confident, more strong, or looking less saggy or aged, it's usually to really express their inner self, an expression of their true self. And we have these deep conversations, that comfortable, safe space whereby they can really share what they really want. And with that in mind, I think they really open up, and that's when the therapeutic journey really begins. We connect onto this level whereby it really is all about the expression of truth and their true best self, rather than freezing up their face or making them have big lips, which is totally not what I do. So absolutely, mindset, perspective, and what I call qualia, which is the subjective lived in experience.
Gotcha. So that's interesting. So people oftentimes come to you, they think for like, some sort of facial or rejuvenation. Maybe, I don't know if they're thinking they're going to get, Botox or some little extra puff in the lips or whatever the case may be. And then uh, you consult with them and let them know that you have more of an internal approach, I guess you could call it. And that'll sort of, is the analogy, like that radiates outward, and it will get you the the better presentation that you're looking for.
That's absolutely right. Um, it's a little bit, you're absolutely right there. I'd like to take that further. And what I do is I dive deeper into the why. People present to me like, oh, I want to get rid of a line here, or I feel as if this is going a little bit saggy. When you ask the why and start with heart and really understand what that means to that person, sometimes there's a loss of their identity. They feel, especially for women, they feel like being aged or older. They seem to be invisible. They seem to be perceived as less than. So there's an element of reminding them that they are not, that they are everything that they can be and they want to be. And that element of self-love really starts when they come and see me. That's a female aspect to it. However, for a male aspect, there might be that masculinity aspect that I don't feel strong or wise or more experienced enough, or I don't look that way, I don't look confident enough. So in the boardroom, I don't seem as I am respected. So it's all about identity and expression of self, which really touches base to ultimately why we connected in the first place.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so that, and it sounds like what you're getting at is that, at least, from what you've seen a lot of, obviously, it can never generalize to everybody, but a lot of the patients that come to you, um, the women are grappling with the fact that they're getting older and they're not, or they feel less attractive and they feel like they're getting less attention than they got when they were younger. And in a sense, you're working with them on that their identity is not all about, whether they're a 22-year-old looking woman or a 49-year-old looking woman, but rather, it's about them, not just, the age of their skin biologically, that sort of thing, and sort of reorienting what their value is based on. And it's not based on, being the youngest, whatever, most physically striking woman in the room. It's about, who you are internally, and the, and that's certainly more sustainable, right? Because people, over the course of our life, we only go in one direction as far as age goes, right? Except for that Brad Pitt movie, Benjamin Button, where he gets younger as the movie goes on. And then with guys, sounds like it's more about them feeling like they don't project confidence and competence and that sort of thing. And that also is coming from inside, right? And it's amazing. I think we talked about this in one of our previous conversations, but I found in my stuttering journey, even though my stutter from age 18 to age 19, my stutter really didn't change much. I still had a really good stutter going on, but my mindset changed a lot. And I went from a point of literally hiding in the bathroom for lunch my entire senior year of high school, the entire lunch hour. I was so worried about people finding out that I stuttered that I refused to find a new lunch table when my only, two friends I was comfortable talking to were not in my lunch period. So I went from that hiding in the bathroom to, by the end of my freshman year of college, to raising my hand. If I had a question in the crowded lecture hall that I thought needed to be asked of the professor, you know, and I had the thought, hey, somebody needs to ask him this. Well, nobody was. And I was like, well, my first thought was, well, you got the stutter. But I got to the point where it was almost like a personal challenge to myself. Like, we're not running away from words anymore. Stand up and ask the damn question. And so it went, and I found that once I started doing that, that was the extreme version. I wasn't doing that every day, but I promised myself, when you want to say something, say it. And even though I still would stutter on words, I felt like the way other people reacted to me, like the universe changed around me. Now, the universe wasn't actually changing around me, right? But what was happening in my head absolutely changed how other people treated me and thought of me. Um, you know, as far as I could tell, right? I wasn't literally in anybody's head before or after the change in me, but seemed to just transform the way that everybody was with me. And so that's awesome. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more valuable in life than letting people get to a much better place inside of their own mind and their own existence, because that's going to change everything for them if they can do it.
No, 100%. No, thank you so much for sharing that story there. It really reminds me of something that really echoes in my mind, and the themes that have been going on over the last few weeks, which is that perception is reality. Because you mentioned a few times that it was very much about what was in your mind and how you perceive. And yes, perception is your reality. However, to really reframe and to reconsider, you could really consider that perception is an illusion, because everything is an illusion of what you perceive, of what you process. And I'll hit you up with another, which is perfection is a delusion. Perfection is the horizon. And I think what I find interesting as someone who does NLP, neuro linguistic programming, with my psychology hat on, is that on one end, we say practice makes perfect. And on the other end, we say nobody is perfect. So with these contradictory, dichotomous rules that we have, or nobody's perfect, yet practice makes progress, it ends up being incredibly confusing. And I have rewritten the concept of practice makes perfect. I believe that practice doesn't make perfect, but what we should desire is that practice makes progress. And I think with that in mind, it relinquishes a lot of judgment from others and ourselves that we're not perfect, because there isn't such a thing. It's the horizon. It's like looking for the horizon constantly.
Yeah. And when you say looking for the horizon, you mean like looking out at this hypothetical perfect point in the future that we're driving towards. And as we do that, we kind of, by definition, are not paying attention to what's happening right here and now.
Absolutely. And even more so, that it's the horizon. So even when you reach to that point, which was a horizon, there's a further horizon, because it's the horizon that you'll never reach. And
Right. Yeah,
so it works both ways. Exactly. It works on many levels there.
Right. It goes back to that old, that old life's a journey, not a destination thing, right? And learning to thoroughly enjoy the journey. And yeah, it's almost a paradox, I feel like, because it's good to have goals, right? I don't know if it's good to strive for perfection, but it's good to strive, like you said, strive for progress, right? And even, and an example of that, right? The greatest, athlete in any sport, pick your sport, like Michael Jordan in basketball. He missed half the shots that he took in his career. So, if you ask Michael Jordan if he had a perfect career, I guarantee you he'll say no. I had plenty of things that I wish had gone differently. So even the greatest ever in that sport wasn't perfect. So we certainly shouldn't beat ourselves up. And it's just completely counterproductive to beat ourselves up over imperfection. And I think that really dovetails in with stuttering, which I don't think we've talked much about stuttering yet. So that I think a lot of us, when we were growing up, got it in our head that we had to talk perfect. And I'll speak for myself. So first I got it in my head based on other kids making fun of me when I was about 11 for the first time, that I was very imperfect when it came to talking. And then I started pretty quickly obsessing with being perfect when it came to talking. And, once I started trying hard not to stutter, I went from, I think, a pretty mild stutter as a young kid to hardly being able to get a word out within a year of starting to, obsess about whether my speech was perfect or not. Whereas before I didn't care, how my speech was. And that made it a lot easier to talk. And so I think this really dovetails in with stuttering. And I know you're involved. Well, a part of what you're doing is life coaching, right? And so have you worked with people that stutter also?
That's a good question. Touching on what you had shared, no, no, I wouldn't actually say so. Not from the top of my head, not at the moment, and not yet. I would like to use it as a psychologist. I would like to use the metaphor that stuttering. I wonder if it relays very similar to some other aspects which are wanting to do something and unable to express your true self, wanting to action something, yet having hurdles and obstacles to reach that end result. And I think life coaching and stuttering is not too dissimilar when you consider what the similarities are. It's reaching an endpoint, reaching a goal, connecting with other people, serving other people, or presenting yourself in a certain way and having obstacles to do that. So I wouldn't say that I have, in terms of the literal sense of the word, but I think that is literally the identity or the model of what life coaching is about. It's very much about enriching people with the education, with the understanding, with the knowledge that they are good enough and that they have the information there for them to claim, to empower them, to let them know that they have the potential within them, and last but not least, very much to enlighten them that there is this glorious masterpiece that is the world that they have in front of them, full of opportunity. And when you had shared your story, I totally agree with you that there's these expectations going on. And I'm actually a part of Toastmasters. I don't know if you're familiar, which is a group or a community. It's worldwide, but there's small communities all across the world. I Googled it a few days ago, and I think there's about 375,000 groups all over the world, which is amazing. And the main core values, let's hope I can remember them off the top of my head. It's integrity, respect, service, and excellence. And with that in mind, I would really encourage anyone who's listening to really consider, because that's what we want in a community for growth: excellence, service, integrity, and respect for each other. So that's kind of my contributions there, that I would really encourage people to find a community, because community is where magic happen, really. And a little segue that I want to kind of throw in here is, there's three main things when we communicate with people. One is what we're saying to ourselves. Another thing is what another person's saying. And the third thing is what we think that the other person is saying and thinking about us. And sometimes, with so much noise going on, it ends up being confusing, noisy. And I wonder, because everyone stutters or stammers in their own way and have their own phenomenon about it. But I do, from my experience, I feel as if it feels very, very noisy when you're in the moment, when you want to share something or say something, express something, present something, and you have these eyes dotting around, laser eyes looking at you, or maybe even rolling their eyes, or even the micro movements, and you kind of judge what they're judging, and or the sense of time elongates, and you feel as if minutes and minutes have gone by, and you're holding on to, or choking on a couple of syllables, and wanting the world just to each like open up and swallow you up. I don't know if every single stammerer or stutterer has the same experience, but with so much noise, I think it's worthwhile to go back to yourself and consider that you can only control yourself, and what you're perceiving of the judgment might simply be your perception of the judgment, and to consider to liberate and free yourself from that. In that way, you live a loving world, a world whereby you love yourself and the things around you a lot more, without judgment.
I hear you. And so that reminds me around when I had that perception transformation around that 18 to 19 years old. I heard a song, and I forget who wrote and performed the song. I need to look that up. But it had a line in there that was very profound, at least in my opinion. And it said, and I'll just sing it: you never know just how you look through other people's eyes. And I remember hearing that, and I was like, that's true. You never know for sure just how you look through other people's eyes. So my take home from that was, why am I worrying about that? Right? I mean, we have to care to some extent. Obviously, you don't want to offend people or, be a jerk or whatever, but, hopefully that comes naturally, not to do those things. And so I remember realizing that, and it being really eye-opening and freeing. And to your point, just removing a lot of the noise in my head. Oh God, what are they thinking? They thinking I'm, stupid when I stutter. Are they thinking I'm incompetent? Or they thinking I'm whatever, right? They're thinking I'm drunk. What are they thinking? What are they thinking? God, what are they thinking? Hurry up, word, come out. What are they thinking? This is weird. All that stuff crowds out our ability, our talent to, have profound thoughts, right? To have good stuff to say. And so, and I do think that concern about what other people are thinking, that fear of judgment is another way to say that, is with not sure exactly how many people, but 1,000+ people that I've had conversations with that stutter on stuttering, that seems to be the most universal thing that I've encountered. I don't want to say 100% universal. Um, and it's interesting, you don't see that, at least with the cases that I've met of people that have, I think it's called neurogenic stuttering or stammering, say they had an injury when they were 21 and then started stuttering. You don't see it as much. I don't want to say you don't see it at all, but it's not as deep seated, right? It's not something that goes back into childhood and sort of was there when we were forming our identity, right? When we were forming our identity, which I would say most of us would say it was something like, age 10 until, maybe 18-ish, depending on the person, of course, and perhaps researchers, well, just like every other discipline, I'm sure the opinions are all over the map on that. And certainly our younger years are important too, those little kid years, but most of us have this really deep, powerful, painful thing that was happening during some of those years. Was that on your stuttering journey? Was that was that some of your most challenging times? That sort of, teenage years and, maybe 10 to 18-ish or something?
Yes, I think I've shared this with you before this podcast. My stuttering range was actually between the age of 10 and 18, which was, but when you shared with me when it was most impactful and when you experienced the most, I found it really interesting how it was very, very similar there. For me, my story was there was lots of change in my world and in my life. So I was originally from Hong Kong, moved to London when I was 3, moved up to Scotland. I actually lived by myself from the age of 14 to 15, by myself in London whilst my parents were up in Scotland. So as a very, very young child, that was very, very interesting. And I was living by myself, looking after my dogs. And I'm catching up with my family over the last kind of few weeks during lockdown because they're staying with us. And I found it really interesting just retelling and reliving that story. During the moments, I intellectualized everything and thought that it was okay, it was normal. However, processing it probably psychologically at that point in time, it was probably very, very quote unquote traumatic because it was the first Christmas by myself. It's the first experience of death of a loved one that I experienced as well, of grieving of my grandfather. It was my first birthday that I had myself without anyone wishing me happy birthday. So I do wonder if that was the trauma. I wonder if it's the chicken or the egg type idea. I'm unsure. However, I will segue because I am multi branched when it comes to my thought process. So I hope you bear with me, and all your viewers and listeners bear with me here. You had mentioned previously if I worked with anyone as a life coach with stuttering or stammering, and when you had mentioned about trauma, it really kind of made me connect with. I've actually seen quite a few people in my medical well-being center doing facial aesthetics and kind of externalizing the inner beauty who stutter and stammer, and that really came from trauma. All 3 of them came from trauma, whether it be a passing of a loved one or abuse as a child or domestic abuse with a spouse. I would say the reason why I was laughing at this is why I didn't recognize this is because when I think of these clients or these patients, I don't see them as people who stutter or stuttering people. I see them as people. And I think us as people who stutter and stammer, we're a lot more compassionate. And I see people who stutter or stammer who have I don't even call it disability, differently abled people as like your favorite color or the color of your hair or the color of your eyes. It's just a different part of you. And for that reason, for me, it doesn't really jump out. It's just you, and that beautiful, imperfect you is what makes people absolutely unique and magical. So that's a little kind of detour from a few questions that you asked back to kind of what I do. Yes.
Yeah, no worries. Um, that's interesting. So, well, and I totally agree. It's just, you know, it's just another aspect of that person. Um, and I think that's important for people to remember, because a lot of us folks that stutter tend to think that everything revolves around our stutter, and that's somehow central in um, what the world thinks about us, what we can achieve or not achieve. And one of the greatest lines I ever heard from a person that stutters about stuttering was, well, so this person uh, is a manager in a tech company, and has a unit, like a group that he manages of maybe 20 people or so. And one of the people that works for him is a person that stutters. And the person that works for him is historically uh, very sensitive about his stutter. And the guy that's the boss, even though he's got a pretty good stutter going on, as far as my buddy can tell, who works for him, isn't sensitive at all about his stutter. He's just like, says what he wants to say, calls the meeting, calls people on the phone, stutters sometimes, moves on like it's nothing. And my buddy asked him one day, how do you do that, right? How do you go through life just stuttering and you seem to not care? That's awesome. How do you do that? And the guy said, well, once I realized that other people don't really care about my stutter, I stopped caring about my stutter. And I think it's very common when somebody has something that's different about them. This is especially true of younger folks who, how many 80-year-olds really care what other people think about, their wrinkles or their pants that they chose to put on that day or whatever. They're like, whatever. If you don't like my pants, then don't look at them. Like, I'm not going to spend 1 second of my remaining years being concerned about what you might think about my pants. And interestingly enough, in happiness studies, my understanding is, on average, of course, that individuals can be all over the map, but on average, as people get older, they get happier, which seems counterintuitive. You would think 25-year-olds would be far happier than 70-year-olds on average, because they probably physically feel better, and they got many decades ahead of them, and they're all that kind of stuff. But apparently in happiness studies, that's generally not the case. Um, Once again, life circumstances can affect things, of course. If somebody's um, has a terminal illness, they might be more challenged in that sense. Um, but on that note, it often goes the other way, actually. If somebody's got, like, you often hear of people with terminal illnesses almost becoming their best self, right? It's like everything's in perspective all of a sudden, and they are not going to spend, their time, at least those that inspire the heck out of us, or they become like a source of uh, of how, no matter what's going on in your life, you can be happy, and you can be uh, still very much alive, and enjoying your life, even though maybe your body's going downhill, but your spirit's not going downhill. And and I know a lot of times you'll hear people say with a terminal illness that they wish they had understood what they now understand about life, which is that, and Socrates, I think it was, Socrates didn't write anything down. It might have been Plato or Aristotle, but they said, I think what they said was, philosophy was the art of dying well. And at first glance, that sounds kind of morbid, but I think what they're getting at is realizing that we are mortal and that we only have so many of these moments. So should we really spend these moments being super worried about whether somebody has a problem with our stutter, or whether somebody's super worried that, that we're bald, or that we're whatever thing about us we might be self-conscious about? Is that really how we should spend our life? Or should we spend our life with that awareness that we only got so long? So why don't I soak up every ray of joy, that I can? And I think there's a lot of power in that.
No, that's really, really beautiful. That story that you're sharing really reminds me of one. Is it okay for me to share with you just a dental analogy that I have, which really relays onto that, and maybe it touches home with what you experience as well. So I've worked in the NHS as in the National Health Service, and I've worked in a very high-end dental practices in the world of adult orthodontics as well. And in my line of work now, when people say, "Oh, just tell me, just do whatever you want for me to make me look good," and I really present them with, how do you want to feel? Because there's no such thing as perfect. You can look more healthy, you can look more refreshed, you can look less tired, you can look less saggy, you can look less sad, because there are features that make people look sad, as in downturned mouth and so on and so forth. And I just want to look good. And at this moment in time, I present to them my experience as a dentist. And I tell them that as a dentist, I've had people walking around the high street and the town being perfectly happy with just one anterior tooth in their head and without a denture, and are the happiest person ever. I don't know if you've had any of those patients before. And then on the other hand, I've had some patients who are in their 20s who have like a wisdom tooth right at the back, that is slightly at a different angle, and like the most depressed person ever who says, "I really want this either crowned or orthodontically moved," despite all the side effects and all the risks involved in twisting and turning and aligning one tooth right at the back of the head. And I just find it, well, obviously in terms of the objective beauty, we could say it is socially constructed, and that 25-year-old is looking gorgeous and the old man with one tooth in his head is looking ugly. But in terms of what they perceive, it's actually the opposite. The older gentleman with the one tooth in his mouth is living the best life. Is thinking, yes, that's absolutely fine. And I think there's an element of gratitude as well, and appreciation. And when you've got gratitude for things that you do have, then things tend to dissolve away. I was speaking, and I think there's a big proponent of depression and sadness in people who do stutter and do stammer, because I can personally say that I've been there, done that type thing. There's a dark cloud over your head when you can't communicate and connect with people. And it's easy for me to say at this point in time, and I'm not going to say it gets better. What I am going to say is that if you hold gratitude and appreciation and thanks in your heart and in your mind, then it does dissolve many things away that you don't need.
Yeah, absolutely. And one way to make that point that I like, which is something that occurred to me, because when I was a little younger, and now I'll be 44 here soon. Probably by the time this episode is released, I'll be 44. And so when I was younger, say in my 20s mainly, but into my 30s also, I used to I didn't sit around all day and dread it, but I sort of had a fear of growing old. And, just like, oh yeah, like, not that I walked around with it all day, but, and I'm the type of person, I need to understand why I should be happy. Not just, be happy, Mike. Being happy is funner, that sort of thing. Like, that doesn't work for me. I need to intellectually understand why I should be happy. And your point you were just making, gratitude. right? And so it occurred to me with this issue of age. So on the one hand, you could think about your current age potentially in a very negative sense, right? I'm older than I've ever been, you know, assuming that you see old as a more of a negative. I'm older than I've ever been, and that sucks, right? But you could also look at that same moment or current age and say, this is the youngest moment of the rest of my life. I should enjoy my relative youth. Same moment you're looking at. One is like, oh, I'm older than I've ever been. And the other is youngest moment of my life. Enjoy it, enjoy it while you can, right? And it's so it's, and I had this conversation with an older friend of mine who's in his late 60s, and he had, had a birthday, and he was a little down about it for whatever reason. I'm a senior citizen now, Mike. It sucks. I was like, well, your 85-year-old self is going to look back on your 68-year-old self and say he didn't know how young he was, right? And so, everything is relative. And that gratitude, I mean, there's a million things that could be better in life. There's a million things that could be worse. And that old adage, we are what we think about. If we choose to think about all the things that could be worse that are not, and be grateful that they're not, right? Like, well, I like to read history. One of the reasons I like to read history is because our ancestors, in almost all cases throughout human history, were living a pretty brutal life relative to what we live now, right? As far as, average age was, 27 years old, whatever. 40% of the kids were dead before the age of 5. The neighboring tribe might invade you at any time and, kill the men and, do God knows what to the women and the children. Most of us live in a pretty good situation now. So there are literally a million things that we can be grateful about. And there's a million things that we could go down negative rabbit holes about. It's what we choose to think about, what we choose to allow into our mind or to allow to stay in our mind. And I'm a big fan of breathing. And I know, I don't think we've talked yet about meditation, but I know that's something that you're into. Well, you want to talk about that, how breathing, we'll take it wherever you want to, but what I was thinking about here is how breathing is somehow connected, it seems, to our consciousness and our ability to fully exist in the present moment.
Thank you for giving me this free scope to talk anything about breathing. That this is magical. So this is where I take off a few hats and put on my dentist hat as well as my my hypnotherapist hat. If you have any dentist friends who listen to this, or any medical people out there as well, I'd want to bust a few myths as well. We tend to consider the autonomic system and then the central nervous system as well. One being the heart and the lungs. We get taught from a very, very young age, like the heart, that we can't control. It does its own thing. However, there is a massive connection. Well, there is a very integrated system of breathing of the lungs and the heart, because if we talk to your technical people out there, is that when you actually consider what is the lungs for, it's for bringing oxygen into the body, and what is the heart for? It's to pump the oxygenated blood around the body. So if you go ahead and breathe from the chest in a very, very sympathetic, adrenaline, hyperventilating, go, 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 go kind of rate, you're not actually bringing oxygen into your lower lobes, into your alveoli, and bring oxygen into your heart, or into your blood, sorry. And therefore, your heart is going to pump harder and faster because it wants to pump more oxygen around. And for that reason, then you're in an elevated state, because you're wondering, why is my heart pumping faster? And then psychologically in your mind, that it's fight or flight, or it's go, go, go. So that's one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, just take a pause. And all you listeners and yourself, Mike, just take a pause and just belly breathe. Breathe into your diaphragm. And breathe every single breath as if it's your first breath. Or breathe every single breath as if it's the last gulp. And just feel that state, the elevation of that oxygenated blood, even how your mind feels just this very moment. And notice how calm your breathing has become and your heart rate has become in only a couple of breaths. And with that clarity in breath, we have clarity in mind. With that slowing down that heart rate, there's less noise because we get a level of zen, of peace, of balance. And with that in mind, we reduce the cortisol hormones, we reduce the stress hormones, which in my medical well-being practice improves your skin, improves your body, improves your bones, improves your skin, improves your flexibility, and it improves your outlet and the expression of who you are. And it all goes back to how we breathe. We forget to breathe. People think that sticking your stomach out when you're breathing is something that it's not the way it looks, it's the way it feels. And these are concepts that I really encourage people to really genuinely consider, because feeling calm, feeling beautiful, feeling your best self, feeling confident is more important, or is the most important, is the utmost important compared to how the stammering looks, how your fascia of your identity is, because you are so much more than that. And I've dived into a somewhat rabbit hole because you presented the concept of breathing to me, but I do really believe that there are so many different exercises. I'll share one more exercise before I pass it back on to you. One of the exercises is the box breathing. People who are in the Navy SEALs, Wim Hof, when you can really dive into really cold waters, and it really practices and exercises resilience, because you focus on the truest, most important aspect to everything, which is breathing, which is breathing in, count for 4 as you do, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and repeat that. I was about to say cycle, but repeat that square. And as you do that, draw that square in your mind's eye. You can do this in the comfort of your own space, or even if you're in a state of panic or distress or trauma, you can nip to the loo, because the bathroom, the WC, whatever you call it, wherever you are in the world listening, that is a place where you can just take 5 minutes just to box breathe, and it really takes you, it brings you back, it grounds you and centers you, and that's the best way I can describe that. So you shared, or you asked about the psychological aspects of breathing, and that's kind of what I would like to present. I've got a lot more to share, but that's what I want to present today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very powerful, and for me, I had as I said, the really good stutter going, and it, went on until I was 41 years old. As far as not, uh, although my mentality about it went reversed 180 essentially from the end of high school, by the end of my first year at college at university. And well, but my stuttering was still, I mean, maybe it was a little bit more mild after I got to that point psychologically, but it was still there a lot. You know, I mean, I still had a really, really good one going up until the age of 41, about 3 years ago. And I found an approach that was, and I kind of, you know, took it to a really bought into it, and I found far beyond my speech. I mean, yes, it helped me to control my speech, but it far beyond that, it helps me to control my mind in a way that I never had so much control in the moment over it. In particular, well, so the way I do it is I try to get to as close to 100% as I can of the day, so that my breathing, and obviously the more skilled you get at something, the less you have to pay attention to it. So it's kind of like the background music of my life now, I feel like, you know, or the background music of my mind. It's not actually music, it's just that breathing. And it's a little different approach, I think, than what you're doing as far as where it is. It's more of a yawn breath, right? When we take a yawn, for example, I mean, if anybody wonders what happens when you yawn, right? Well, we take a crazy huge breath. That's probably the biggest breath that we take most days. You take a yawn, like, you get that mouth open, that full, you know, rib expansion. But Well, I mean, you'll see that with athletes, right? Like when there's a really frenzied time on the soccer field or football field, as you guys call it, or on the basketball court when it's really intense and they're running back and forth. You know, like with LeBron James, you'll see his chest rising and falling, right? Because he needs that extra oxygen coming in. And Interestingly, I've noticed also when you and of course, you know, fluent speakers don't pay attention to their breathing, as far as I know, for the most part, when they're talking, right? It just happens. But when you ask a fluent person like a loaded question, let's say they have a complicated relationship and you ask them how it's going, right? They'll be like, well, let me tell you, Mike, you'll see them take a huge, you know, get a lot of air in the tank because they got a lot to say on that breath sort of thing, you know, and it just happens subconsciously for them. But I've noticed that they, you know, when somebody, and I, there's a speech language pathologist in training that's on my, you know, that's on the Stutter with Confidence program with me. And she was telling me that she just learned in her program about inhalation and exhalation when people are talking compared to when they're not talking. You know, and this is not for people to stutter, but just, you know, your average speaker out there. And when people are not talking, on average, their inhalation is typically about as long as their exhalation. So it's like 50% of your time is inhaling, 50% is exhaling. I suppose, you know, sometimes there's a pause in between those two, but those are roughly equal. When somebody's talking, their inhalation becomes only 10% of their time, and their exhalation becomes 90% of their time, which makes sense. You have a lot to say, you take a big breath, and then you have a lot to say, and you talk. I'm going to the park, I'm going shopping, I'm doing this, and it happens on one breath, right? And so I found that to be interesting, how the breathing significantly changes when people are talking compared to when they're not talking. And but this consistency of breathing deep, and I think that's the common denominator. You know, whether it's, you know, your focus. And I was trained on belly breathing when I was in high school, also. But whether you're belly breathing more, right? There's no chest movement there, or I'm taking a big. I call it a yawn breath, that full rib expansion. But either way, those are deep breaths, and you don't have to take as many of them, right? And I know what you're saying. When people are anxious, a lot of times they'll do like a
Stop here.
like a dog panting or something, right? And that happens naturally, right? When we're in anxiety, it tends to affect our breathing. Um, not just people that stutter, anybody from what I understand, when under a lot of stress, anxiety, it affects breathing. And that has that sort of negative feedback on the body, right? Not only are we anxious, but we're also not breathing. And so the body, all the cells in the body are not getting their normal flow of oxygen. And on the opposite extreme of that, if we can be, and everybody's going to have their different perspectives on this, but if we can be Jedi masters, as I like to call it, of our breathing, then, and we are skilled enough so that when we're then under a bunch of stress or pressure, or we're angry, or we're, really scared, or whatever the case may be, or in a lot of pain, for example, like Wim Hof, and I still can't wrap my head around what that guy does. It's one of those things I'd almost have to see with my own eyes to fully believe it, that he can get in, baths of ice water or whatever for an extended period of time. But certainly as far as pain tolerance, I think there's a good bit of research that people, through things like meditation and being dialed into their breathing, can really take a lot more pain, or can transform their pain into something not as awful, not as much suffering in that experience. I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts jumping into your head. You have any?
I do. It really reminds me of a few things. So I'm reading I don't know if you've ever read The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. I'd have to send you a copy of it because it's really fascinating. I think you'll absolutely love it. I'll send you a link as well, and I'm sure your viewers can have a little peek at that. You can put that on the appendix. One of the things is, I think it's scroll mark 3, which is today I'll be a master of my emotions. And one little fragment, one little sentence of it was, I would allow my actions to control my emotions rather than my emotions controlling my actions. And I found that really profound and really powerful. And from what you had mentioned about the breathing techniques, because it's essentially a state change. When you change the state of your body, then your mind only agrees, because you can't go, yay, I'm really sad. It's just incongruent, and your body takes over to be having your hands on your hip and having your power pose, and to be anxious and sad at the same time. It's almost like having smiling and being sad at the same. It just simply doesn't work. And that's why laughing therapy helps, and all of the above helps, because changing the state of your body and state of your body, so the shape of your body and the state of your body changes the position of your mind, and that by that you're actually evolving. And I love that, being kind of a Jedi master of controlling your emotions. And I love that, because one of the things that I do really express is that you can only control the controllables. Control the controllables, and anything else.
On that note, Kevin, you may very well. Do you know Christina Parker? She lives in Scotland. She's from Canada, or she's from Canada, but she lives in Scotland. And I got an episode. It's like my 5th episode of the podcast is named "Control the Controllables," because she had mentioned that also. It's interesting. You guys both live in. I don't know if that's a Scottish, more common phrase in Scotland or what, but it's awesome. But go ahead.
It must be to do with rain or something. It must be in respect to the rain.
You can't control it. We learn young in Scotland. You're not going to be able to control the rain. It's out of your hands. Control the controllables.
That must be it. So yeah. Sorry, I'm very tangential. Can you remind me what my train of thought was?
Sorry, I apologize. The control the controllables is
mindset. Okay, emotions. Okay, thank you. I'm back on the train. You're all good. It's just because I'm so tangential. This is how when reflecting on my stuttering journey, I do wonder if having multiple languages and having multiple voices talking in my head is a reason. So if you've got if you've got listeners who are multilingualists, I'd love to hear their views on that as well, because I have that fascination with multiple cultures and multiple languages, what that affects, because you feel like you're being judged in different dimensions with multiple voices on top of everything else in between, and even your own voices, but in different languages. Anyways, it really reminds me of resilience. When you mention Wim Hof, it's the idea of controlling your body and your mind, and your thought process is essentially controlling your outer bodily experiences. And it really reminds me of my practice in hypnotherapy. I actually did a dissertation in my undergraduate degree in dentistry, studying anxiety and needle phobia as well, and that in comparison to sedation and general anesthesia, in terms of the long-term effect of their perception to what pain and fear was. And I'd love to grab this opportunity to share this idea and concept of what pain is to you. Is that okay? So if I ask people, and I usually do in a kind of like a social conversation, when they say that's very, very painful, I like challenging them and say, what actually is pain? Describe what pain is. What I usually get back from that is that it's just an experience that I don't like, or it's just painful or sore. What they do is that they give me a synonym or another word for the word pain rather than describing it. When I dig a little bit deeper, like it's an experience that I don't want, or it's really it's not good. And with that, I really tease them a little bit more. And there's an element, well, there's a main element, which is emotional and psychological. And as a dentist, a pain is basically a sensation, a nociception that tells you or any animal to get away from this place as soon as possible, because it's causing you harm and damage. And you may fear the loss of control, and that concept of damage, harm, and perhaps fatality is not good for you. And that's why you process pain as being bad. So through my needle phobia regression and work that I do with my clients, as well as my line of work, injecting people in the face to make them become the best version of themselves in terms of harmonizing and balancing them, I go through a process of breathing techniques. And whilst I do that, I ask them the question. I tell them that if you want to stop at any moment in time, pop up your hand. You are in control. You are in charge. If you have any questions, let me know. You are the boss. The person in my chair is the boss and in charge. And you know that we consented, that we agreed after a consultation and assessment that we want to do this for a positive outcome. I swore an oath to do no harm. So for that reason, it's not going to harm you, because I am a medical practitioner and I have all your best interests kind of in the forefront here. So all you're feeling is the sensation of intensity, maybe pressure, a strong feeling to really get you to where you want to be. And through that, at the end of the treatment, they absolutely love their results, but they get really pleasantly surprised by simply using words. We can rewire and recircuit what pain means, what suffering means. And I like to tie this together and really represent it back to you. This could be the pain of judgment. This could be the pain of the history that they told themselves in the past of what trauma that they had. So it works on various levels, that pain is not what you see. If we understand that pain is something that maybe you don't want, that may harm you and may cause you to die, and if you understand that whatever you're doing isn't going to cause you to die, that you decide that you want to do it for your own good and that is for your best benefit, then you've essentially dismantled what the concept of pain really is.
Yeah, that's good stuff, right? Like how you're reframing pain. And, you know, I mean, also on a evolutionary level, pain shows up for a reason, right? Like take your hand off the hot fire or it's going to do damage, right? And yeah, if you reframe it so that you realize, no, this actually is not doing damage, not going to kill me. Uh, and, you know, that reminds me of something that Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, said when they asked him, what did his parents, you know, what was a lesson? What was maybe the biggest thing that he learned from them? And he said, well, I think it's that they taught me that you can take almost any negative and turn it into a positive. And I mean, what a superpower for him to develop at a young age. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence. And he can't run history twice, but I don't think he becomes Michael Jordan without that perspective and that, uh, you know, and he very much, to your earlier point, he was a take action sort of person. So if there's a challenge, if there's a, you know, there's a problem, there's a fear, don't sit around and think about it all day. Go and take action or do something. And I used to, you know, the way I had previously thought about it before you said that was that the action can lead the thinking rather than the thinking leading the action. But I like what you were saying. You know, you could substitute thinking for emotions there. The action, you know, and in a way, I think what it's getting at is that our mind and our body, and increasingly in recent months, I've been sort of formulating it like this in my head. There's no bright dividing line between our mind and our body, right? I think of it sort of like a soup, right? Like you know, well, a soup that appears to be homogeneous, where you don't know when one starts and the other one, or in this case, it doesn't appear homogeneous, or at least in Western society. And I think it's a little different in Eastern ancient traditions, but in Western society, I think, once again, going back to Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, there was a bright dichotomy created between the mind or the soul and the body. And I get that for reasons of eternity, because clearly we're not going to take our body with us. We know that for sure. And so, you know, if one believes that we continue on after death, and there would only be the soul that could possibly go on, you know. But while we're here, while we're in this life, it seems to me that there's that distinction between the mind, soul, if you want to merge those, and the body is much less clear than we have thought historically. And I think of the breathing like it sort of sits in the, almost at the nexus in between the body and the mind, and is connected intimately to both. And so if you get dialed into your breathing, it's gonna, you know, help you deal with any of your physical challenges, make you feel more energetic, waste less energy with nervous energy. You know, you don't have that, as well as sort of soothing the mind or setting the mind free to really fulfill its potential.
Mm-hmm. It really reminds me of a presentation that I've been doing in various other aspects as well. And it's about this pandemic. And this pandemic is the fact that we're incredibly disconnected. We're so dissociated and disorientated as well with what is important. Whether we, especially kids or we adults nowadays as well, we tend to focus on how many likes and how many followers, how many comments that we get, rather than the actual existence of family and food and community that we have. Or we focus on flashy cars or jewelry or flashy watches and what title we have, rather than the appreciation of running water or of our bodies, even our aging bodies. every single part of it. I even love the idea of pain. I'm like, it's such a miracle and such magic, the fact that your body can tell you what it's feeling and what it's wanting. And it's really important to just listen and reconnect. And when you mentioned Western and Eastern, I do think in healthcare especially as well, that we think dentists do this and medics do that and that. I think that we do a massive disservice to human beings by treating them like body parts, like Mr. Potato Head. They do that in facial aesthetics as well. You want big lips or straight nose or big cheeks. Whereas if we completely look after someone, then we're always wanting to ultimately just center them back to their truth and the optimized best self. And you can use that for anything, whether it be stammering, stuttering, depression, anxiety, pain management, or anything. You just want to bring them back to the best optimized true self.
Absolutely. Just, it's almost like just getting them out of their own way so that, that latent potential can shine, if you will. So, but Kevin, it was a great conversation, man. We've covered quite a few subjects here, and you're definitely one of the the super interesting people that I've talked to on this journey, and I thank you for joining us.
No, I'm very, very grateful. And me personally, I've gotten lots of value from this discussion itself. So I hope other people who listen get value, and I hope you do too.
Well, I know I did, and I think some more folks will as well. So take care.
Cheers, mate.